Yes, in the end, for you and me. Radioactivity.
Okay, now Hall's textbook also uses this chapter to go into radiologic terrorism. That too is covered on your boards. I can't think of a better place to put this, so I think it fits here. So we'll talk about terrorism. I'll try to tell you the things I think you need to know for your boards. Now, you can ask the question, why do you even have to learn about terrorism? What NIH says is that if there's a radiation accident, the first line of defense for that accident is going to be in radiation departments, and that radiation oncologists actually understand radiation exposures. In Europe, it's the bone marrow people that are involved in radiological terrorism protection. I would argue that they don't do that much with radiation. And if you talk to our bone marrow people, they sometimes, I've given like one lecture or two lectures to them, they don't understand radiation at all. So I think it makes sense that this is in the realm of radiation oncology, but it puts burden on radiation oncology departments. Okay, so what are the kinds of threats one might find? Certainly we know that there are overdose incidents that happen. Cedars-Sinai in 2010 had 260 incidents of clinical radiation overdoses. There have been big cases that have made their way into the newspapers. Astro has put a lot of effort on trying to stop that in recent times, I believe successfully, so that it's decreased, but it is still there. When one transports radioactive sources, I've been involved in a couple of Department of Transportation issues where they're transporting plutonium from one source or other radionuclides, and that becomes a place of potential overexposure. Industrial sources is a concern. Nuclear power plants, we already heard about 2 accidents. The government is concerned about the attack with a weapon of mass destruction. We did Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What else could there possibly be? They usually say that this is unlikely, and that the more likely scenario is a radiological dispersal device, or an RDD, a so-called dirty bomb. Okay, so what are the scenarios? Scenarios are you could blow up a nuclear weapon in very close to a large city, in which case you're going to have acute radiation syndrome and long-term effects in that population. There could be an attack on a nuclear power plant that would leave some people with acute radiation syndrome. More likely are considered to be RDD and RED events, and RDD is the detonation of a dirty bomb, which could contain chemicals and radiation, radionuclides, some sort of radiologic dispersal device, and then there could be a hidden exposure where somebody goes and takes, say, a sample of tritium, puts it near a metro station in Chicago, and people walk by there all day long, and while their total exposure is not overwhelming, the fact is that it will make them be very afraid, and it will create a lot of psychological trauma. This is a diagram of one of these RDDs where we've put the radiation in here, we have a detonator, we might put in some fertilizer to allow for it to be more explosive, and when it's detonated, then radiation is going to be scattered all over the place. This is the RDD. This is the mass casualty event where there is a bomb dropped in an area. This is not considered to be very likely. Nevertheless, the dose and numbers will be pretty overwhelming. These are the kinds of exposures you might expect at 5 gray. This is a picture of some of the nuclear materials that are used for nuclear bombs. These are actually bombs lined up in a hangar in Los Alamos or near Los Alamos, New Mexico. I've actually seen these. I love this diagram from Hall's textbook. This is an Al Qaeda dirty bomb. I mean, I don't know. I think this could be written by like a 10-year-old, where you put in cobalt resin and you have a dirty bomb at the end of the day. I don't know. I just find that funny. But you do need to know this. So, so where would you be likely to find loose sources? Where can they be used? How can they be used to be able to create problems for people? One is smoke detectors that contain a large amount of americium-241. And the other are things that you could get readily in a hospital. So cesium-137 is one that's often mentioned because you can actually take it out of a source. But even radioactive seeds, Y90, anything that would be available in a hospital for treatment would be a potential source of risk. Here is the example of the smoke detectors that contain the americium-241. They found thousands and thousands of these smoke detectors in a terrorist cell in London, apparently with the idea of using this for exposures. This is a moisture density gauge that contains small amounts of both americium and cesium, and could actually be used as a source. So you go out and buy a bunch of these and you'd have them. This is what the cesium tubes look like. They had some that were missing from Greensboro, North Carolina. They were, in fact, stolen. They're pretty small. They're the size of a dime, but their dose is pretty extensive. A cesium-137, what they claim here is that there were 19 small cesium sources that had 22 gigabecquerels that were missing. They finally found them, but it was quite serious. Okay, this is in Japan. This is their cabinet that is used to store radioactive things to protect. One of the drugs that we'll mention later when we talk about mitigators is DTPA. It's a decorporation agent that takes radiation out of the body. Another chemical that we'll talk about later is iodine, which we can take sodium iodide tablets and displace the radioactive iodine that might be present. And this happens to be a radiation protector that they believe is quite effective, called amifostine, and we'll talk about that one a little bit later as well. And then that one of the other things that's in here is radiogardase, which is insoluble. I think that's what this one is. Okay. So there, we define external contamination as, might be obvious, but it is any contamination on the surface of the body. It could come about from a dirty bomb or a hidden device. What we usually do is for external exposures, we do a survey, scrub, rinse sequence. Here are the steps in a moment. For internal contamination, and this internal can come from inhalation, from eating it, or from a wound through transdermal. Examples would be something like iodine in thyroid, americium, or plutonium in bone. It's hard to handle internal contamination. One thing that we do is we use potassium iodide tablets. So what does potassium iodide do? Think about it for a moment. You are exposed to radioactive iodine. It's going to go to the thyroid. If you take potassium iodide that's cold, you can displace that radioactive iodide and just wash it out so it leaves the body. That is commonly done. And the US has stockpiled, or had stockpiled, a large amount of it for administration in the case of a nuclear event. When Fukushima happened and that big plume was coming to the west coast of US, every friend of mine in California and Washington was emailing me and saying, hey, do I go take potassium iodide tablets? And I said, look, you guys, this is like really small amounts of radioactive iodine. It's not going to be damaging to you. And potassium iodide has some side effects for it. So I would not do it. But, if it were a higher accident such as Chernobyl, had they given potassium iodide in Chernobyl, they probably would have prevented every thyroid cancer that they saw. They didn't do it, but they should have. And then there's a reagent called Prussian blue, which is used to try to decorporate, to take the cesium-137 out of the body. It's not as effective as we would like, but it is one of the few decorporation agents we have. You need to know this. You need to know these steps. So a person has been contaminated, comes into your ER. What do? Standard medical triage. You first attend to the critical injuries that the person has. You then decontaminate them. You remove their clothing. You survey them with a Geiger counter to find out how radioactive they are. You tend to open wounds first because you want to keep it from entering the body. You tend to mouth and nose next because you want to keep it from entering the body. You then treat the intact skin. And then this is a board's question. This is key. You stop decontaminating when further efforts do not reduce the count, and when the count is less than twice the background. You got to know this. So you stop decontaminating when no matter what you do, you don't get it down further, and when it's less than twice the background. So that's critical to remember. And here's the summary. There are these three main syndromes that we talk about for total body exposures: hematopoietic, GI, and CNS. There are prodromal effects as well as latent periods associated with this damage. Much of what we know about total body radiation exposures in humans is from these accidental exposures. So this is all I have for this topic. I'm going to switch over to the next topic, but I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not hearing any questions. Let me try to find topic 10. Oh, wait, sorry, this is 8. We want 9.
Radioactivity is in the air for you and me.